Welcome to CBS News New York. I'm Dick Brennan. The New York Democratic primary debate in the race for governor just wrapped up on CBS 2. Governor Kathy Hochul faced off against New York City public advocate Jumaane Williams and Long Island Queens Congressman Tom Suozzi. Our panel of political strategists is here now to break it all down for you. Javier Lacayo is Senior Vice President at SKDK, that's a political consulting firm. Basil Smikle, the Director of Public Policy at Hunter College. Thank you both for joining me. And I think the best question to start with, did each candidate do what they had to do? Basil, the governor.
Yeah, I always think about it in this way, who helped and hurt themselves. But I think for Kathy Hochul, she did exactly what she needed to do. She hasn't been on the job that long. So for her to be able to come in and talk about what she has done in this legislative session and in the budget, to be able to say that she did this, even if it's a carryover from some things that Andrew Cuomo did, she's able to talk about the record. And with the platform of governor and that pulpit, it does carry a tremendous amount of weight. A little shaky in some places, but she did what she had to do.
Javier, what do you think?
You know, I would agree with everything that Basil said there. Really, what Kathy Hochul needed to do tonight was maintain the status quo. Yeah. What her opponents needed to do was to somehow fundamentally change the dynamics of the race. And I'm not sure that either Tom nor Jumaane were really successful there. You know,
two things I noticed style-wise is that there were very few interruptions, almost no crosstalk. What do you make of that?
No, please.
Yeah. No, well,
yeah, don't interrupt.
There you go, so much civility. No, what I think what we really saw is, you know, no one is trying to look like the bully on that stage right now, right? That's right. We have the first female governor in the state's history, and so I think you saw everyone really on their best behavior. The second thing, though, is that I think that a lot of them were having a little bit of trouble drawing really significant differences from the governor. The big hit that we kept hearing over and over, right, was on the Buffalo Bills Stadium. Right. But aside from that and a few other hits on the NRA, there wasn't a lot that they were able to really land on her.
So let's talk about the topic, which is crime. And even though it's a gubernatorial race, the bottom line is what's hitting people hardest, it seems, in New York City and perhaps around the state. Look what happened in Buffalo, horrible instance of tragedy. It seems like they didn't really lay a glove on her when it came to crime. Basil, what do you think?
Well, in part because I think most New Yorkers look at the mayor, if we're talking about New York City, they look at the mayor as being chiefly responsible. What she did do, particularly when talking about bail reform, it's really interesting because a lot of folks blamed bail reform for the rise in crime. Tom Suozzi certainly did that. And what she did by tackling that early on in her tenure was take that argument essentially away from them. She basically said the issue of dangerousness. Here's how I tackled it. So all of you that were coming after me for doing that, you can't do that so much anymore. What's also interesting is that she incurred some anger from the left for going after it in the first place. So in some ways, she's appealed both to conservatives and suburbanites in this state by sort of being in that lane.
But go ahead.
No, and you know, something else that I think the governor can really hang her hat on that not a lot of others can is the fact that she has a historically close relationship now with the new mayor, right? As I think she pointed out, it's been over a decade since we've had a governor that's actually working hand in hand with the mayor on things like homelessness, on things like crime. And so I think that she made that point, and it's a major boon to her.
And yet it seemed like it took 22 minutes. I looked at the clock, 7:22. I saw that's when Tom Suozzi, to me, really made the points at home that affected the viewer when he started talking about crime in the subways, terrible crimes, listing them. And then you're sitting there saying, yeah, you know, that's what's going on in New York City. But as you guys say, for some reason, that issue wasn't hitting home at all, perhaps because of that one answer by Kathy Hochul.
Yeah, you know, what's interesting, and going back to our point you made earlier, and to paraphrase Bill Clinton, he's always said, you have to convince voters to fire her and hire you. And I don't think that they've done that, even in the ways that they've personalized those stories. Because how do you tie crime to Kathy Hochul? How do you tie a lot of the things that you're talking about, perhaps except for the Buffalo Bills Stadium? How do you tie that to Kathy Hochul? And it didn't really get that connection, and it didn't come across as strongly as it needed to.
Yeah, I thought Suozzi did a very good job there when he mentioned that, we're giving him $1 billion, plus you got to pay $11 for a beer.
Right.
And that was that moment where you felt like, hey, I'm the average person, and that's how I'm affected. Yeah. They must have said Buffalo. I think you ring a bell every time they said Buffalo, okay? Yeah. Javier, did that score at all?
No, I mean, look, I think that the governor really defended her decision in talking about the environmental impact statements that were done, the 10,000 jobs that it's bringing to the region. She made a really good point about, you know, really talking about all the diverse constituencies across the state, which I think is smart. in a statewide election, particularly one where she could face a little bit more of a challenge from the Republican nominee. And so I think she did a good job there. I did think that Jumaane did do also a pretty good job at bringing it back to gun violence, right? And contrasting the $1 billion that was spent in what he was describing as a tax giveaway in what could have been invested in cure violence programs and gun violence prevention programs here in the city. So it was an effective hit, but I'm not sure it went far enough.
One other point I noticed was that there was a lot of speechifying, as we like to say in the debate business, but not a lot of storytelling, not a lot of that old-fashioned. I remember except at the very end, when we heard each one of them tell a personal story. And I know, Basil, at one point you noticed perhaps the one and only shining moment of non-speechifying was from Jumaane Williams.
When he talked about having Tourette's, and I'll tell you, when he became public advocate, he gave an acceptance speech, was a great acceptance speech, but the last 5 minutes, which he almost didn't give, he sort of started to walk off the stage, came back on, and talked about what it was like to have Tourette's, and that we had to, as a city, have more compassion for people with mental health. So when he got into that tonight and then talked about himself and brought himself into the conversation, particularly his experience on an Amtrak train, those are the kinds of things that bring voters into you. Absolutely. And we didn't get a lot of that tonight, except from him. And just as a comment about him broadly, one of the things that stood out to me about him is that he always did try to bring it back actually to his experience with his constituents. This person in my district, this person I went to school with. That actually is effective for him, because it does meet that point about storytelling. Could have been done better, but I think it approaches that point.
And while we didn't get many personal stories necessarily from Governor Hochul, I do think that she made an important point of bringing her perspective and her experience as a woman into this role, and really made a point of that. When they hit her on the lieutenant governor's recent arrest, she leaned in and pivoted into the historic female leadership team that she has throughout the administration. So I think that was also an impactful comment there.
And we both seem to notice how she parried the left, because here we have someone who's got to worry about a left flank and a right flank. Swazi clearly seemed to be going to the right. Jumaane was staying to the left. How did she parry those two, guys?
Yeah, pretty well, because if you actually think back a little bit with Andrew Cuomo was able to play the middle pretty well, because he also had an independent Democratic caucus, those Democrats that caucus with Republicans in the Senate, to help balance what was happening on the left. Kathy Hochul actually has to do that on her own, because she has a progressive assembly and a progressive state Senate. So the fact that she's been able to work with the mayor and actually even get some concessions on that bail reform, this is her actually trying to stake out by herself this sort of moderate lane. And she's done a very good job of that, and she did it here at the debate as well.
And my impression that I got from her at the debate was that she wasn't too concerned about sort of appealing to one extreme of the party so much. She was already playing down the middle. Her very first answer on gun violence was talking about the coming SCOTUS decision, right? Her answers on abortion went back to the expected SCOTUS decision there. And I think you're already seeing her play a general election game where she's bringing it back to conservative, Republican-driven attacks on a lot of basic rights. And that's a very strong place for her to be in.
Actually, and let me add to that, because I think it's a really important point, that one of the things that she has done early in her early tenure as governor is spend a lot of time pushing back on the national political waves, whether it's abortion or gun control. And I think that being able to step into those moments is really key for leaders. And I think she's used that very well to show herself as both a state leader and potentially a national leader.
You talked about Bill Clinton, and we remember the phrase, for those of us often, of triangulation, the way he pivoted between the left and the right and somehow cut right through the center. And for a good part of his administrations, he did that very well. What does this state become? We have in a progressive city, we have a moderate mayor. In what looks like a very progressive state, we have right now at least, a gubernatorial leader who is a moderate. Which way is this state going?
Well, I think New Yorkers are complicated creatures, right? This is, and so I think that we're seeing that, the biggest thing you said it right, why we're seeing sort of this convergence, I think, of ideologies is because for the first time in decades, crime is really at the forefront of even the most progressive New Yorkers, right? And we are seeing that dynamic play out in real time. And the governor certainly has a very delicate line to play, but I think that she did it expertly tonight.
Boy, I got to tell you too, when you know, I used to run the state Democratic Party, so I've been all over the state. Right. Once you leave Rockland County, you would be surprised at the number of Trump signs, whether it's Trump 2016, Trump 2020, or Trump 2024 that you're seeing around the state. It's an incredibly diverse state. But I think this main tenet of politics remains. It's always bricks and mortar politics, what people can see, touch, and access. Mm-hmm. And what crime does is it puts in your face this issue that you have to confront, that you can't turn away from. And the recent poll said that more than 3/4 of New Yorkers are concerned that a violent crime will happen to them. That's just something that no leader can turn away from. The problem is that it's not easy to solve at the same time. And so that's really this concern that all of our leaders are going to have to deal with. And we'll see if who's adept at doing it.
And you make the point about Trump signs around the state. We have a Republican debate coming up, and we see some of those Republicans who have been supporters of Trump. And you wonder, could one of them pull, let's say, a Virginia election where the Republican came through, those elections on Long Island where we saw the Republicans surprisingly winning some of those races. And let's face it, Phil Murphy won by very few votes compared to what he should have done, as we all saw. So is there a possibility that this Republican wave in the fall could affect New York State gubernatorial politics?
I think that's a very difficult thing to actually see happening statewide, particularly.
You mean you don't have the answer here right now?
No, but I think that,
one word answer.
Come on,
but I do think that, you know, look, if the current state of the GOP primary is any indication, I don't see this happening at all, because you have Lee Zeldin, who's basically Trumpier than Trump at this point,
yes,
who's leading the pack right now, right? And so I do think that, you know, we are seeing this pressure on some of these Democratic politicians, right, to get a little bit tougher on crime, but I don't see this being a full swing back to the Republicans.
There's a reason that Kathy Hochul talked about women in leadership in the state for the first time in its history, because Democrat or Republican, abortion touches everybody. That's an issue that most Americans feel the same way about and don't want to have their rights abridged. And my sense is that, to everybody's point, that, you know, this state at this point in time, the Trump folks that are here, the Republicans that are here, probably are okay with aligning but not hugging Donald Trump. And that is a fine line that they have to walk, where I think Democrats and moderates are starting to find some common ground. And that, I think, is what the Republicans need to be concerned about.
And yet all elections are supposed to be about the economy. Stupid. You guys, you know the phrase, okay? Right. So if that's the truth, how come we saw so little about that? I mean, inflation is affecting New Yorkers too. We heard very little about that tonight. A lot about crime, a lot about Buffalo. Is this going to be an issue in the fall?
Yes, it will be. It certainly will be an issue in the fall, not just for New York, but certainly for the midterm elections.
But in the gubernatorial race, I'm surprised that it got such little.
Yeah, no, it's an issue, but what's interesting to me, I think, as Democrats, is that what they're probably doing is shielding Joe Biden a little bit from some of the conversation around inflation and so on, because the truth is there's not much that they can do about it. They did talk about affordability, and that's important, but there's still not that much that they can do about it. Any attacks or issues related to that become attacks on the Democrats nationally, Joe Biden, and the members of Congress that are running, and that becomes a little dicey.
And, you know, Dick, as I think most New Yorkers will be able to tell you, affordability is not a new issue in New York City or in New York State. Yeah. We've been talking about affordable housing for decades. We've been talking about the rising cost of living for decades. This crime issue, this homelessness issue, the perception of it, is the big hurdle that Democrats are going to have in November.
Absolutely.
And that's the new dynamic that has been introduced for the first time this year.
And that's what you'll be hearing from Zeldin, Giuliani,
right.
Astorino, Wilson. I mean, that is going to be the issue, at least that they're going to be facing, right? Is Kathy Hochul ready to answer those questions, though?
I think she can answer them, and she will answer them. I just don't know if you're a Republican in this state that, again, I go back to the whole point, is there enough to fire her and hire them? And I just don't see it on those specific issues. I just don't see it. They would have to go deeper into Trumpism to be able to create that level of momentum, in my view, to unseat her at this point.
And I think, you know, Governor Hochul, and, you know, when I think of her facing these, you know, hypothetical attacks from some of the Republicans, I think she showed how deftly she deals with them tonight. You know, she wasn't afraid to to talk about the scandal with the lieutenant governor straight on, acknowledge that she was disappointed, you know, that there was information that she didn't have, and was able to successfully move on past it. So I think as long as she brings that kind of energy, she's going to be all right in the general.
All right. Well, we're going to hold you to all that, by the way. We recorded this. We will play back. No, gentlemen, listen, thank you so much. Great job. We'll be doing this all again with the Republicans very soon. Thank you for coming in. And we can tell you once again, well, the leading Republican contenders, including former Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino, Andrew Giuliani, son of Rudy Giuliani, businessman Harry Wilson, and Congressman Lee Zeldin, their debate will be held on Monday, June 7th. June 13th at 7 p.m. You can watch live on CBS 2 and streaming on CBS News New York. And once again, you can join us here for a live post-debate breakdown. And a reminder, early voting for the primary begins June 18th and runs through the 26th. Election Day is Tuesday, June 28th. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. For more information about the election, we have a voter guide on our website, cbsnewyork.com. I'm Dick Brennan. Thanks for stopping in.